Hey guys, I'm back again. First video in a while. Doing it again on my iPad. Though since I made the last video yesterday, I dropped the iPad once again on the concrete garage floor, which has destroyed the screen even further. Now I've got a huge crack completely across the screen and dozens of smaller cracks. I don't know how long this thing is going to last, and I can't afford to buy another one. I don't know what these things are too sensitive. Granted, I don't have a case for it, that would save it, but I don't know. It seems to me that they could have created a hard plastic casing for these things, which they didn't do. I think they like the fact that they break so easily. So, I've had ideas for videos and haven't done them. And I'm trying to keep these down to under 3.5 hours. I think the 3.5 hour point, as soon as I hit 3.5 hours today, I'm going to stop talking. So that's going to be the cutoff point. So you can count on this not running over 3.5 hours. What I thought today is the hardcore music fans and collectors, which is probably pretty much everybody who's going to see this video, we can be a quirky bunch. And we all have like unique things, I think, that might be unique to just us individually as collectors, and not even to other collectors. And because I've discussed this with a couple people who don't share this one particular quirk of mine, and that is compilation albums. And there's a lot of different types of compilation albums, so I'm kind of eyeballing one particular type here, but I'll show you the ones that I've been interested in different categories. So there's compilation albums which are theme albums that have different artists and multiple volumes. So like in the classical world, I tend to, maybe it's because I don't know a lot about classical music, so these kind of abstract buys are easier, and it's easier to learn about different composers through compilation albums. Maybe it isn't just buying a set album by a composer, but there's these this one happens to be Deutsche Grammophon, who put out this series called Weekend Classics. And there's actually, that's a title that's been used a couple times over the years for classical compilations. I think London Records also had one called Weekend Classics. And this is just pretty much famous, well-known, not avant-garde classical music. This is the mainstream stuff. But I kind of fell in love with these. I like the title, Weekend Classics. Funny reasons that I sometimes go for these. And I like the artwork. And in some cases, that's enough. So you've got these, and different artists. These are not generally not dedicated to a single composer. So this one has Rodrigo and Tchaikovsky and Mozart and Dvorak, Mendelssohn, Mozart, and I just love the artwork style that they did these. This one, just called Weekend Favorites, has Mascagni, who I've never heard of as a composer. Massenet is another composer I've never heard of. But also has Satie, Vaughan Williams, Grieg, Mahler on here. And these are all, basically taking from regular, quote unquote, regular albums in their classical collection. But the years that they range could go back to the 1950s even. 1960s, 1980s even. So here's another one. They don't put the titles on the back, so I got to turn it around to read it. Romantic Weekend, Debussy's on here, Mendelssohn, Barber, Verdi, Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, Ravel, Prokofiev, interestingly enough. Weekend, The Dreams, Grieg, Puccini, Beethoven, blah, blah, Vaughan Williams. Actually, I didn't mean to go through all these. I'm not going to show the rest of them. So that's what I kind of, when it comes to compilations, mean by a theme. And there's those type of compilations, and then there's what I call series compilations, all of which I've talked about before, like the ECM Works compilations. Now, each individual CD is just, one of their artists, and it's a compilation. It's a best of, or just various tracks chosen, that kind of thing. So these don't mix up the artists, but they all came out at the same time. And, in the Works series, I have all of these in the Works series because I'm a nut. I get to be a completist in some of these. And none of these in the Works series have any rare works, any new pieces, anything that's not on the regular albums. And yet I bought them, and I have the whole series. I think there's only about 15 or 16 in the series. But I bought them because I wanted, for some reason, I'm attracted to the series, even though there's no rare tracks on them. And that's another thing, when you get these compilations, sometimes they have, if it's one specific artist, a lot of times what they do is they throw in a rare track that isn't available anywhere else to get people to buy it. And of course, as a completist, in a lot of cases of specific artists, I got to buy that CD just to have that one track. The 1 or 2 or 3 rare tracks that are around on that particular CD. But that to me isn't falling in love with the compilation concept that I'm really talking about here. So here's another one I've talked about a lot, another series, the Compact Jazz collections. Now these I'm very nostalgic about, the Compact Jazz collection. Again, they're just compilation albums, no rare tracks. And this is Verve again. Verve is shameless, absolutely shameless in the number of compilations they put out by their artists. They have more compilation albums out by many of their artists than they actually have, regular non-compilation albums by that artist. And I've been in love and buying all these various in the series Compact Jazz discs strictly for nostalgia reason. These came out, and I've talked about them, and I don't know how many I have, 40 something maybe, just called Compact Jazz, that came out, as I've mentioned numerous times before, when compact discs were new, and it was impossible to get an artist's back catalog on CD because the CD manufacturing plants and the budget of the record companies, didn't allow them to just simultaneously go back into the whole history of an artist, especially in the world of jazz, where these artists record a lot of albums, and a label might have 30 or 40 albums by an artist. And now all of a sudden CDs come around. They can't put all 30 or 40 of those albums into production on CD immediately. So, what Verve did initially is, this was really the first compilation series on Verve during the CD era. Verve always put out compilation albums by their artists, but once the CD era came around, they went nuts and they did many. And these would go out of print, and a couple years later there'd be another series, all with the same artists, a lot of the same material, just regurgitated over and over again. Someday I might even do a video on just Verve, just trying to nail down the numbers of compilations that they've put out of their artists just in the CD era alone. And I guarantee I would probably miss some of the series. The nice thing that they do is they have, titles for them, and themes for them. So these were simply called Compact Jazz, but they all came out within a period of a couple years. and they all had similar artwork, whereas the others all had different themes, and I'll show one of them. This isn't one that I went nuts with collecting like the compact jazz. The compact jazz thing was nostalgic to me because that went back to the dawn of the CD era, and it was exciting to all of a sudden have not just new albums, but to me especially old albums, you know, things that you had listened to for years on vinyl and worn the vinyl out so that it was clicks and pops and noises, and all of a sudden to have this old album mastered on CD with clean sound was a thrill. And when those compact jazz things came around, they were great, especially if you weren't real knowledgeable about the artists, because the artists that they feature were guys that had been around for decades and had many releases. And unless you were, you know, had intimate knowledge of these artists, you wouldn't even know where to start with their discography. So naturally, a compilation is a good place to start. So Verve over the years has just put out, I think one was called, I have a few of them, Silver Edition, you know, which meant nothing really. One of the more interesting ones that Verve put out, I don't know how many I have. I immediately found 3, but I think I have more, was a series called Jazz Around Midnight. Again, just one artist. And, you know, but again, they were compilations. So I just immediately found 3, Wes Montgomery, Jimmy Smith, and Chet Baker. And these were called Jazz Around Midnight. Now, the interesting thing with these, as opposed to the other compilations that in a lot of cases had a lot of the same material, they actually had a theme for the music in the album. And the Jazz Around Midnight, which was, you know, a little bit more interesting to me, which is why I did pick up some of them, was these were the quieter, mellower moments, which is strange when you think of an artist like Jimmy Smith, you know, who's basically an up-tempo blues guy. So the Jimmy Smith one is particularly interesting because he didn't do a lot of ballads. He didn't do a lot of quiet stuff. And, you know, it's really not necessarily a midnight jazz album. There's still blues in here and things that he's known for, and things that are quite a bit more up-tempo than you would probably find with a lot of artists that they try to find. Let's find the quiet stuff that these guys did and kind of compile it into an album. So those Jazz Around Midnights are kind of interesting. I kind of doubt that they're still in print. Though they came a bit later. The original Compact Jazz series was the mid-'80s, mid to late 80s. This one was from the 90s, the Jazz Around Midnight. But, you know, there's probably a zillion copies of these still around. Those I like because for once, the theme kind of has an effect on what songs are selected instead of just selecting the best known tracks or the best of from an artist. And then my reason for really doing this video is probably most of you out there have favorite artists that you have most of or all of their output. And being a completist, or maybe this is just me, you'll buy compilations by them even though you've got all the material anyway. And I did that for, thankfully these guys didn't put out a lot of compilations. And I don't know if I would, at this stage, pick any more up if it didn't have, like, unreleased material. But I've been quite a big fan for a number of years of the Yellow Jackets. And they've put out, I only have 4 here. I thought there were more. Compilations over the years. This is the Priceless Jazz Collection, which is meant to be, that's a series too. The Priceless Jazz Collection is generally, it's never rare stuff. And it's a budget thing meant to be an introduction to an artist for those who don't know the artist. The thing that I would never recommend with the Priceless Jazz Collections is the fact that most of the CDs are like 50 minutes. Like, they're really short. You know, they could include another half hour of music in just about all of them that I've seen. But the reason they don't have more music is because they're a budget. They're meant as an introduction. So why did I buy it? Just because I'm a completist. I have all the material. And what I noticed about most of these compilations by these artists, here's a slightly better one. Yellow Jackets collection has a little bit more music, has like maybe over an hour. But they're almost never the selections I would make. They tend to show, I don't know, a lot of these people, especially when collecting like the Yellow Jacket stuff, seems like they don't like ballads. They don't like the mellower stuff, you know? They don't like to show really the full range. They'll put a couple tracks that may have gotten, for instance, radio play, or maybe was used as a theme on a TV show or something like that. So I can understand those because they're well-known tracks, or at least as far as the artist goes, their most well-known stuff. But then they tend to like to show the up-tempo, trickier stuff by the guys. And it's like every time I buy one of these, it's like, why did they select these tracks? Here's one that's an exception. It's another best of, but it's a weird one because it's the years that they recorded for, I think it's Warner Brothers Records, which was their first couple albums where they were just a very commercial, funky, smooth jazz group. To me, their weakest stuff. And then they signed back, oh man, like 20 years later, again with Warner Brothers, and made a few albums. I think they made 3 albums again under the Warner thing. So Warner puts out this best of, but the contrast in styles, it sounds like it almost is 2 different bands, different musicians in the band at the time, certainly. Half the band is different from the early tracks to the later tracks, but also the style of writing and recording and the instrumentation. You know, you have their earliest stuff, which is this very funky commercial, very dated actually sounding early 80s stuff. Sounds more like it's from the late 70s. And then their later 90s stuff, so it was like 20 years later, almost, which is a lot more straight ahead jazz and a really lousy song selection too. It's like it's really funny. They pick the worst tracks off of the album, and if you look at reviews of the album of people that don't know the history of the band, people are like, why did they select these tracks? This is horrible, you know. But also the jump in styles from the commercial electric funky R&B stuff to the more pure jazz stuff. It's like you changed the radio dial and changed. It's awful. The only thing this compilation has going for it, it has, of all the compilations they put out, it's the only one that has a rare track on it. A track that they recorded, I think, in '92. The theme from Il Postino, which is a movie theme that they recorded during the sessions for one of their albums and didn't put it on the album, so they stuck it on here. So, you know, being a completist, I had to get it, but it's like 4 minutes, you know, so I'm basically buying a whole CD for one track of 4 minutes. But I'm a completist. I'm a nut. Now, something that surprised even me, as far as, you know, I've got those. I've got a few artists, you know, that I like, that I'll buy a compilation even though I've got all this stuff. You know, a guy like Eberhard Weber or Bar Phillips, I would do that with. But not the next guy I'm about to show you, which is weird that I kind of got into this funk of listening to this guy's music a lot lately, because it's Chick Corea. And I don't know why I've gotten interested so much in picking up. He's got a lot of compilations. And the thing is, I'm not a Chick Corea nut. Like, usually the only time I'll want the compilations is one if they have rare stuff, but I'm not even countering with the rare stuff. You know, why do I want the compilations? I don't even know. Usually the only reason why I do is I'm a completist. By far, I don't have everything Chick Corea did. Now, I don't know how many albums I have on vinyl. I don't even count those when somebody says, how many albums do you have by so-and-so? Because I never play my vinyl anymore. I pretty much don't buy vinyl, and I only buy CDs. And most of the vinyl that I have that I like at all, I've purchased the same album on CD. So I guess I probably do have a few Chick Corea vinyls that I don't have the CD counterpart of, but all the ones that I can think of, I've since bought the CDs of. Now, Chick Corea to me is funny because I'm not actually a fan of his playing, but he's a brilliant musician. To me, he's too busy. He plays too much, and his compositions are too busy, and he's got a great technique and is a fantastic musician, fantastic composer. But I always had this feeling like he's drinking too much coffee before he goes to the studio or before he writes this stuff. I always want to say to him, you know what? Stop, slow down, and smell the roses, because he writes great stuff. And some of these things you want to like slow down to a third of the speed of the way that he wrote them, and just listen to all the changes and stuff that's going on. And over the years, I tell you, most of the, for all the, I just counted, I have around, I thought it was more, to be honest with you. I have around 40 of his CDs that I've bought. And most of those have been in recent years, oddly enough. And pretty much the only stuff that I listen to on a regular basis is mostly his ECM works, which you know me, you know I'm an ECM fan. That's hardly a surprise. And it's not because, oddly enough, it's not because the ECM works are pretty much all acoustic piano and no synthesizers, because I actually like the way he plays synthesizers. But it's the direction of the music. I'm not a big fan of the Return to Forever guitar stuff. I liked Return to Forever more when they had saxophone in the band and Joe Farrell in the original incarnation. They went a bit overboard for me for the guitar stuff. That's more for hard rock and fusion fans. And that's actually, I have another compilation of that. I actually have. I don't know. I'm not even sure 100%. Well, I do know why I bought it. That's right. I'm a big fan of Bill Connors, the guitarist, even though my least favorite stuff of his is the stuff he did with Chick Corea. But they did put out, which I didn't show here, I didn't pull out, a Return to Forever compilation. They've had a bunch, but one of the compilations had some live material that was never released with Bill Connors on guitar, and I bought it just because I'm such a Bill Connors fan. I'm not even though I'm not really a fan of that material so much, but it had never been released before or since to my knowledge. So I bought that. But with Chick Corea, I only have about 40, I think, CDs, which, you know, if you take a look at his output, that's I don't know, about 3 years worth of his output. Like, he still puts out album after album after album. You know, and I feel sorry for the hardcore fans trying to keep up, because I don't know if you could keep up with Chick Corea's output, even if you didn't buy any albums by any other artist. It's nearly impossible. And he started recording as a leader. I'm not even talking about sideman gigs. And two, he recorded as Stan Getz pianist, like around 67 to 72 in there. And that stuff is really great, Stan Getz stuff. But that's an aside. But talking about Corea as a leader, he started recording as a leader in 1967 or 68, right in there. And he never stopped, even when he was, recording as like Stan Getz pianist or something like that. And he was putting together like his early avant-garde bands like Arc and Circle and that stuff that most avant-garde stuff he ever did, which oddly enough, he's never revisited that type of stuff. That's the first stuff I really got into listening to him by. And some of that stuff is on ECM. The Arc and Circle band, which are basically the same band, just one without a saxophone player. I think it's Anthony Braxton is the saxophone player in one version of the band. I didn't check my history here. Then he went on to do, like 1971, he did 2 solo piano albums called Piano Improvisations 1 and 2 for ECM. And this was 1971, I'm pretty sure that was. And this was something that was pretty rare at the time. It wasn't the glut of solo piano albums that you have out. And then he started recording in a duet with Gary Burton for ECM. And one of my favorite albums of his ever is an album that he did with Gary Burton and a string quartet. Now, Chick wrote all the music for that. That one's really good. And I bought that, I think 83 that came out. I still have the vinyl of that. I have the CD of that. That's one of my top 3 Chick Corea albums. In that one, he managed to slow down at times a little bit. And I don't know if it was the string quartet that made him stop and smell the roses a little bit more. But I really dig that album. And he did one in the mid-'80s with flute player and saxophone player, but I think he only plays flute on the album, called Voyage with Steve Kajula, which is another, could be my favorite Chick Corea album. That one's really good. Very much just piano and flute. Very much a chamberish thing. Those albums I listen to at regular intervals. But other Chick Corea stuff, even the stuff that I like, I tend, oddly enough, not to pull out and play that often. And I'll go, like 4 or 5 years and not get into much more than the stuff that I already mentioned, like the ECM stuff with him. And then all of a sudden I'll go on a tear and I'll start listening to other things by him. And because he had this really good period and incredibly prolific. I think in 1978, I think he had like 4 albums come out, as well as doing a tour, a concert tour. And for all those albums, he wrote like most, or if not all, of the material, which is incredible. And different permeations, a jazz quartet, maybe a piano duo thing with Herbie Hancock. But 78 was an incredible year for him. And all the mid-'70s, or actually all of the 70s, which is also includes the Return to Forever stuff, and a lot of the stuff that I'm not even crazy about. But his solo albums under his name, he did a lot of stuff and a lot of really good stuff. Not even for ECM. I'm talking apart from his ECM albums. And I heavily got into listening to those recently. And I guess because I had a couple compilations of his, I just got in my head, wow, I don't know, and I can't even tell you why. I want to get some more Chick Corea compilations when I could just go out and buy full albums by him that I don't have, because there's a couple hundred of them out there. But now, as in a lot of artists, of course, one of the first, or probably the first compilation I had by Chick was this. I actually have, I have other compilations by him that I forgot to pull out, not counting the Return to Forever one that I already mentioned. But there's compilations of his early stuff, like I'm talking about 1970. And so it seems like that he had recorded some albums as a leader around 69, 70, maybe even 71, for very small labels. And those labels seem to license the music out to anybody who wants to put it out. So you get all these compilations of early samplings of his work from like 67 through 70. But one of my first, and I have a couple of those, which may have been the first compilation that I picked up by him. But of course, being a fan of the ECM work series, naturally, I bought this. And this is different because ECM never licenses their stuff out to other labels. So for all the other Chick Corea compilations that I have, none of the ECM material appears on any of them. I also forgot to pull out a box set that I have. I don't even know why I bought it, because I wasn't even like it. It must have been on sale or something, because I wasn't like heavily listening to Chick Corea at the time, and I didn't even have it loaded in my computer. I think I listened to it once and put it back on the shelf until now when I pulled it out again. And it's a 4 CD set which goes through his entire career up until the time that the box set came out. It goes up to the early 2000s, all the way back to the 60s. And it's a 4 CD box set with some rare stuff on there. I must have got it for a really reasonable price. That one's interesting. I forgot to pull that off the shelf. I could see why I bought that, though. A lot of rare stuff. A lot of stuff I didn't have. So that's at least 3 CDs I can think of that I forgot to pull out. The box set, the early compilation of his early like 67 to 70 stuff. I think I have 2 or 3 of those compilations. And then the Return to Forever compilation. But here's the, probably my favorite one, but it's the only one that's got the ECM work stuff on it. and another one he did years later for ECM Selected Recordings. This, again, is part of a series, the Rarum series. And this came out in early 2000s. So that was another compilation. This one selected by Chick himself. But oddly enough, I like the material better on this one. This is a particularly good one. Good sampling of his ECM work. So I started listening to that, and maybe that's what got me in this funk of listening to, and I don't know why, compilations, because in my mind, whenever I'm familiar with an artist's work, I almost never like the selections on compilation discs. Now, as you all know, as I've mentioned many times before, I'm also a fan of the Compact Jazz series. So Chick's got 2 of them. And some artists like Stan Getz have actually 3 in the Compact Jazz series. So it was inevitable that I would buy these whether or not I liked the material anyway, because I'm such a huge fan of the Compact Jazz series. So, you know, I guess between the ECM compilations and having these 2 and pulling them off the shelf and listening to them, I kind of got, gee, that's an interesting mix of recording stuff. And one of these, it's weird because there's one here that pretty much has work only from the 1970s, just the first one called Compact Jazz. They put out a second one called Compact Jazz the 70s. Why they called it the 70s, I don't know, because there's tracks in here, or at least one track from 1967. So they should have found a different title for it, even though pretty much all the other tracks are from the 70s. But there's a Stan Getz track on here. He did an incredible album. If you like Stan Getz at all, there's an album that just a jazz quartet, Chick Corea on piano, oh man, Roy Haynes on drums, I think it was. I'm forgetting who the bass player was. All well-known guys. And there's an album called Sweet Rain from 1967. Just a quartet, acoustic piano. Chick doesn't play electric or anything on there. And I have that album all in compilations, like Stan Getz compilations and Chick Corea compilations. I have the whole album pretty much spread out through all the different compilations. But I have yet to pick up the actual CD itself, which is only 5 tracks, 37.5 minutes long. But it's nice to have all the sessions together in one place, because I have the album spread out over like 5 CDs. But I really, really liked it. And I went online and was reading about the what people think of the Stan Getz Sweet Rain album with Chick Corea. And everybody says, you know what, and Stan Getz recorded a lot of albums. And yet they're saying, for all these albums, this is one of Stan Getz's best albums. And it's kind of weird because, you know, there's no orchestration on it. There's no additional musicians. It's just a jazz quartet and a studio recording. But I got to say, there is something that I just really like about that recording. I know in 1972, Chick went again and recorded in the studio with Stan Getz. I think different bass player and drummer. But another quartet album, which people think highly of, called Captain Marvel, which is named after a Chick Corea composition. And people like that one. And Chick plays electric piano on it. And actually, I think like 3 of the tracks on there are Chick Corea compositions that you would know from his solo albums. And I have that one. That's a good album. But I don't know, there's something magic about that Stan Getz Sweet Rain album. It's just really sweet. You have to be into, acoustic jazz. But there's just something about that Sweet Rain album from 1967 that's awesome. So, of course, now I'm listening to Chick Corea because I've got the ECM compilations. I've got 2 different Compact Jazz compilations. I'm also listening to him on the Stan Getz Compact Jazz compilations because there's tracks from him there. And Verve, here's another Verve series, one that I've never showed before, called Verve Jazz Masters, which is just another excuse for them to, have another series. And this series is interesting because they numbered them. So Chick Corea's happens to be number 3. I don't know, they'd probably go up to 20-something at least. But that's another one that Verve came out with in the mid-90s, it looks like. Verve Jazz Masters, just another kind of regurgitation of the same thing. No new or rare material, Yet I'm a sucker, and I bought it. Chick Corea Priceless Jazz, which again, I talked about this. The Yellow Jackets have a Priceless Jazz compilation. This is the same thing. This is only 80s stuff from the Electric Band, so you have to really like his Electric Band stuff, which to me was easily the weakest stuff he's ever done. Some of it's so generic sounding, as well as I know Chick's playing, I wouldn't even, for a lot of these tracks, even say, oh, that's Chick Corea. It's just a lot of really, well, the synthesizers tend to sound a bit 80s. Not all of it is bad, and actually, I have 2 Electric Band albums, which I think I listened to each one of them once when I first got them. I did pull them out again and listen to them. They're not as bad as I thought, but I absolutely thought they were the bottom of the barrel as far as Chick's music goes. So, you know, any opinion that I'm going to have from that is only got to be slightly better. So they're not quite as horrible as I thought is about all I could say about the Chick Corea Electric Band. Good players. Nothing wrong with the players, the people involved. It's just the music was really kind of generic, almost sounding like Chick is like, I want to get on smooth jazz radio, but I also want to appeal to kind of my fusion fans who, you know, like the Return to Forever guitar stuff. And that's all this is. It's 50 minutes, so there's no rare stuff on here. It's not even a good selection. You know, some of the Electric Band albums, they only select one track from, and it's like a really weak blues sounding thing. It's like, why would they select that track? Just really bad selection, cheap price. You know, good introduction maybe to the Electric Band. I don't even know. It's really not their best stuff from what I've heard of them. But only 50 minutes. Again, I guess because the more tracks they license, the more it costs them. So, you know, it's 10 tracks, 50 minutes. You could squeeze another half hour on here, and they didn't. But again, you know, it's this weird thing. I'm a completist, you know. So here's another one called, I got this one recently, Electric Chick. This is a pretty good selection of stuff from the 70s. Only like, I think 3 years, like 76, 77, and 78. So it's only a compilation of 3 years worth of tracks. But during those 3 years, he probably easily put out 9 albums or something. And some of my favorite stuff, non-ECM stuff, is from that period, that mid-70s period. Not with Return to Forever, but on his own solo stuff. He did albums like The Mad Hatter and My Spanish Heart, which is a great album, and Leprechaun, which is a great album, especially for synthesizer fans. And so he's had, you know, this is an interesting compilation in that, unlike a lot of the other Verve compilations, they didn't regurgitate a lot of the same material, so there's tracks in here that I haven't seen in other compilations. But no rare stuff. So why did I buy it? I don't know. And here's another one, recent acquisition, a 2-disc set. The best of the Stretch years and the Concord Jazz label. So this jumps, there's only 4 tracks from the Stretch Jazz years, which is a label that Chick owned and ran himself and released his own albums on, I believe. And that was in the early 80s, and that was all, just in the early 80s. So for a 2-disc set that has 21 tracks on it, they only have 4 from the Stretch Jazz years, early 80s stuff, and then it jumps to the late 90s. So there's kind of a gap missing there. And a lot of stuff he did for the Concord Jazz label. And that's mostly acoustic, going back to acoustic stuff, which is interesting to hear him go kind of more back to his roots, including some stuff with Gary Burton, you know, just duets with Gary Burton on Vibes. And one rare track, different permeations of jazz bands too. And he's recorded, I didn't realize how much he recorded. I'm still kind of catching up on his 70s work. And a lot of his 80s stuff I kind of missed because that was the electric jazz period. I'm about, you know, halfway there with, I like the ECM stuff he did in the 80s. He didn't record for ECM after the 80s. The 90s stuff I'm still haven't caught up on. The 2000 stuff I still haven't caught up on. So in a way, the compilation does serve a purpose because I have, apart from the stuff from the Stretch Jazz years, the early 80s stuff, I don't even have all of that. I have Only 2 out of the 4 albums that's drawn from. I don't have any of the Concord Jazz stuff. I'm surprised. But I'm like I said, you can't keep up with him. So this is a good sampling of the stretch jazz, of the Concord Jazz stuff especially. Mostly acoustic, very well recorded because it goes into the 90s. So, higher quality recordings. Some Gary Burton stuff, which I love his stuff with Gary Burton. And then other jazz groups, smaller jazz groups like quartets and things like that, I think. I just got this, so. I didn't mean to talk this long. My whole point was, I can't even explain to you why some artists I'm totally interested in buying their compilations, even when I have all the material. In the case of Chick Corea, I really shouldn't have bought the compilations. I should just go out and buy the full albums that they're drawing from. But I have this fascination with his compilations for some reason. Just like I did say with the Yellow Jackets. Maybe with the Yellow Jackets, that's more of a completist thing. I'm not sure. Maybe with Chick, it's like most jazz artists, when you buy a Chick album, it's the same set of musicians on all the tracks of that album, whether it's solo piano, whether it's a quartet, whether it's a big band, whatever. And the one benefit that the compilation albums have is, since they're drawn from different albums, they have different settings of musicians. So you're not hearing a jazz quartet, a jazz quintet throughout, the same musicians from track to track to track. That might tend to get a little boring after a while. So the compilations have different size bands, from solo to big band and everything in between. So for a lot of jazz artists, and certainly with Chick, maybe that's the attraction to compilation albums. But also, they'll give you the opportunity of could I ever catch up with Chick Corea's releases? Even if he never released another album from this day forward, I kind of doubt it. So, with his later stuff, like the Concord Jazz years, I don't think he currently records for Concord Jazz. I'm not sure. I don't think he does. I wouldn't know where to start, so the compilation actually helps for that. But I don't know. I like collecting his compilations. And like I said, I missed out on pulling down a few of them even that I have here, and others that I have on my want list. I don't know why. I don't want to, albums that I already have the music from, but it's just that permeation of it, that somebody selected these weird tracks to go together on a compilation, and you hear different permeations of different groups and things like that. I don't know. Is that the attraction? I'm not even sure. It's one of those quirks that we as listeners and jazz, or music fans in general, have, that sometimes you can't explain. Didn't mean to go on this long. It's way too long. It's okay if you tuned out. But that's it. I'll be back at some point. Take care, everybody.